Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at the PC performance for Mass Effect Andromeda, which is going to be available for everyone on March 21st. I was able to play it a little bit early because I use the Origin Access program, which is $5 a month from EA. It's pretty good. You get 10-hour trials to games before they come out like this, like Mass Effect Andromeda. So it's nice being able to test the games a few days before they come out for you guys so you can get an idea of how the performance is on Mass Effect Andromeda. So we're going to get into all the performance on the RX 480, GTX 1060, 1080, and 1080 Ti here in just a few minutes at various resolutions, average and minimum frame rates, and all of that. But first I want to let you know the test system that we're using here today is the frame rater build that I did recently. It's running the i7 7700K, which is overclocked to 5 GHz, and that's paired with 16 GB of DDR4 memory, which I keep at 3000 MHz. I was using the latest drivers from NVIDIA as well as AMD. So for AMD, it's their optimized driver for Andromeda. It's 17.3.2, and for NVIDIA, it's their latest 378.78, which came out last week with the launch of the GTX 1080 Ti. But let's jump into the options menu here so we can take a look at the settings that are available to us and what I was using to test this game, which was the max settings here. Right now I'm at 1440p at 144 Hz, but this game does support ultra-wide right out of the box. It immediately scaled perfectly to ultra-wide on my Acer display, which I reviewed. I did a performance video on it yesterday, which you guys should definitely check out if you missed that. We also got VSync off in here. It does support high dynamic range, although I don't have this display I'm using right now is not HDR, so I wasn't able to use that. And triple buffering was also off. Going into the advanced graphics options here, we can see that we do have film grain and chromatic aberration options, which both of those I turned off because I just find them to be hideous in any game that they're put in. Just stop using them, but thankfully they give the option to turn them off, which is nice. So wouldn't want them to have them on by default either because they just look really bad. We've got a resolution scale mode here, which I had set to 1.0, so it's running at native resolution in all the testing we did. And everything else in here is up at the ultra settings. So texture quality, anti-aliasing. For this, they've got off FXA and temporal anti-aliasing. I use FXA because I find temporal to be rather blurry. It kind of blurs out a lot of the texture, so I don't like to use that in any game. Ambient occlusion, I was running at HBAO full, but they've also got HBAO and SSAO, or you can run that off if you want to. Post-processing quality, ultra here, texture filtering, lighting quality, shadow quality, effects quality, mesh quality, all these up at ultra. Shader quality goes up to high. That's the highest that one goes. They just got low and high for that option, so I was running it at the highest available. Terrain quality, vegetation quality, and that rounds off the list. So you can see here everything running at the highest settings that was available to us. So let's jump into the performance now. We'll start off with the RX 480 and the GTX 1080 at 1080p, which we'll do a side-by-side comparison here with that you'll be seeing on your screen. And you can see that the GTX 1060 is running this game a little bit better than the RX 480. So even though AMD got out the early drivers for Mass Effect Andromeda, it just seems to be running a little bit better on the NVIDIA hardware right now. But both of these cards struggle to maintain an average of 60 FPS at max settings, even at 1080p here. Starting off with the GTX 1060, we can see we got an average of 56 FPS and a minimum of 46, and when we push that up to 1440p, we got an average of 37 and a minimum of 32. So really struggling with this game on the max settings. If you're running a card like a 1060 or an RX 480, I would definitely look to get in there and lower some options so that you can get the best performance possible on your system. And this game is just really, really taxing. You can see the area I'm going through in the game it's just a lot of effects going on, lots of foliage and particle effects on the screen and everything, and it's a really gorgeous looking game. So it takes a very powerful GPU if you want to max this out. So I would look at running on something like the high preset maybe if you're using something like a 1060 or an RX 480. We can see here on the RX 480 performance that we got an average of 55 FPS and a minimum of 46, while at 1440p we got an average of 35 and a minimum of 31. So very, very close, but the game was overall running a little bit better on the GTX 1060, and I could feel that when I was playing the game as well. It just felt a little bit smoother on the NVIDIA card. That's something I really can't quantify with data because the numbers are so close here, but the game was running just a bit smoother on the GTX 1060. We'll move over to the GTX 1080 now, where we can see we got an average of 97 FPS and a minimum of 85. So absolutely killing it at 1080p, and at 1440p it was playable, but it did come down below 60 a little bit during some of the cutscenes and other high, action parts of the game. We got an average of 65 and a minimum of 55. I did also test the new GTX 1080 Ti. We can see here that got an average of 127 FPS at 1080p and a minimum of 108, and 2560 by 1440 we got an average of 86 and a minimum of 73. So if you're running a 1080 Ti or planning to get a 1080 Ti to play Mass Effect Andromeda, don't worry, you're going to be covered absolutely fine. As I mentioned, I also did test on ultra-wide with the 1080 and the 1080 Ti, which were able to power relatively well. With the 1080, I would look to lower some options, but the 1080 Ti has no issues powering 3440 by 1440 max settings. As you can see here, getting an average of 71 FPS and a minimum of 60, while the 1080 fell behind to an average of 52 FPS and a minimum of 44. But just like the 1060 and the RX 480, if you drop that down to high settings, you should be able to play it relatively well here, even at the ultra-wide resolution. And also, all of our cards, by the way, were overclocked. I forgot to mention that earlier during the system specs. All of our NVIDIA cards had an additional 200 megahertz on the core and 300 megahertz on the memory, while the AMD RX 480 was pushed up to 1400 megahertz on the core and 2150 megahertz on the memory. So overall, I'm pretty pleased with the performance of Mass Effect Andromeda. I know looking at some of these numbers on like the 1060 and the RX 480, it might be scaring some of you, seeing it down below 60 FPS, but I can't emphasize enough that this is just a extremely taxing game. It's beautiful to look at, so I feel like the performance hit that we're seeing is completely justified, and it runs pretty smooth. I mean, we're not seeing any, massive frame drops here. The minimums are fairly close to the averages, so the frame rate is pretty tight, even on the low-end GPUs. It's just a pretty demanding game to drive. As we could see, the GPUs pushed up to 99%, really being taken advantage of here by the game's engine, as well as the drivers and everything. So I've got no complaints here about this game. If you are looking to pick it up, I will leave a link down in the description below over to cdkeys.com. If it's available on there, you could probably save a few bucks. I picked it up on Origin because I have the Origin access, and you get like 10% off with that. Not sponsored by them, by the way. I just actually really like the program. I wish Steam had something like it, and Uplay. Origin access is pretty darn great, I'm not going to lie. But I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you are not already. And I'll see you guys next time. Ta-ra.